There's a moment in history, a single moment, when everything changes, when a decision made by one man destroys an empire.
On January 23, 1565, an old man rode toward battle on an elephant. His name was Alia Rama Raya, say it, Rahma Rayah Ya. He was 80 years old. For 20 years he had ruled an empire. For 20 years he had dominated every enemy around him through pure cunning. He had played kingdoms against each other. He had humiliated sultans. He had taken their territories. He was invincible. But that day, on that battlefield at a place called Talikota, everything was about to change. And it would change because of betrayal. Not from an external enemy, from his own generals, from within. This is the story of how one moment of betrayal destroyed the last great Hindu empire, and how the world forgot about it. Most people don't know about Vijayanagara. Say it correctly, Vijayanagara. It's not a word you'll find in most history books. It's not taught in schools. It's not part of the narrative that dominates historical discourse. But for 200 years, it was the most powerful empire in Asia. Not the Mughal Empire that came after. Not the sultanates of the north, but Vijayanagara in the south, an empire so wealthy, so powerful, so sophisticated, that it rivaled any civilization in the world. And yet, almost nobody knows about it. Almost nobody knows that it existed. Almost nobody knows that it was destroyed. Almost nobody knows why. The question is, why was Vijayanagara forgotten? Why did the world not remember the greatest empire in southern Asia? Why was its story erased? The answer is complicated, but it begins with a betrayal. A betrayal so shocking that it brought down an empire in a single day. And it's a story about power, ambition, and the price of arrogance. Let's talk about what Vijayanagara actually was. Not the fallen empire, but the empire at its peak. In the year 1509, a man became king. His name was Krishnadeva. Say it, Krishnadeva. He was a genius, a military genius, a political genius. Under his rule, the empire expanded to its maximum size. He conquered the sultanates of the Deccan. He defeated the Gajapati Empire of Odisha. He brought the entire southern peninsula under his control. The city of Vijayanagara, also called Hampi, grew to an estimated size of 500,000 people, 500,000. In a time when London had 30,000, when Paris had 50,000, when most European cities were villages by comparison. The city wasn't just large, it was wealthy, extraordinarily wealthy. The empire controlled the trade routes of the Indian Ocean. It exported spices to Europe, pepper, ginger, cloves. It exported textiles throughout the world. Cotton so fine it was sought after from Portugal to Persia to Arabia to the Far East. But the greatest treasure of Vijayanagara wasn't spices or textiles, it was diamonds. Portuguese chronicler Domingo Paes visited Hampi and described markets where diamonds, rubies, and pearls were sold literally by the kilogram, not individually, by the kilo. In the streets, in broad daylight. The wealth was so abundant that it seemed infinite. This wealth was more than just luxury, it was power. The rulers used this wealth to build temples of extraordinary beauty. Temples with such intricate carvings and elaborate design that they rival anything built in Europe at that time. The temples still stand in Hampi today as evidence of the sophistication and artistry of the civilization. The city was strategically located on the Tungabhadra River, say it, Tungabhadra, in a landscape of massive granite hills. These natural fortifications made the city nearly impossible to attack. The geography itself was part of the city's strength, so Vijayanagara was large, wealthy, powerful, and artistically sophisticated. For 200 years, it was the dominant power in the southern subcontinent, and this is important. Nobody in Europe knew about it. Nobody in the Mediterranean world. Nobody in China or the Islamic world had any detailed knowledge of this empire. It developed in its own sphere. The empire was born in 1336. Two brothers, Harahara I and Bukhara founded it. But their origin is controversial. There are two competing stories. Some historians say they were originally commanders of the declining Hoysala Empire to the north. When the Hoysala collapsed, they inherited the throne and the territory. Other historians tell a different story. They say the brothers were originally part of a northern empire called the Kakatiya. They were captured by the Delhi Sultanate, forced to convert to Islam, and then sent back south to suppress a rebellion. Once back in their homeland, under the guidance of a Hindu sage named Vijayanagara, they renounced Islam, reconverted to Hinduism, and founded a new empire. Both stories might contain truth. What matters is this: the empire was founded as a bulwark, as a wall, as a defense against the advance of Islamic invasions from the north. For 200 years, Vijayanagara fought endless war against the sultanates. Bijapur, Golconda, Ahmadnagar, Bidar, Berar. The Doab of Raichur, a fertile strip between rivers, was the epicenter. For centuries, Hindu and Muslim armies massacred each other for control. The Battle of Mudgal left tens of thousands dead. War was constant. The rulers were pragmatic. They recruited Muslim archers. They allied with one sultanate to destroy another. This was war as politics, not ideology, but power. Under Krishnadevaraya, the empire reached its apex. A military genius who crushed every enemy. He defeated sultans and Gajapatis. The city grew to 500,000 people. Wealth beyond measure. Temples were built. Infrastructure expanded. Trade flourished. Merchants from Portugal, Arabia, Persia converged on Hampi, but the Golden Age had dark shadows. Krishnadevaraya's rule was marked by tactics of annihilation. Enemies were not just defeated, they were eliminated. Soldiers captured in war became slaves. The rigid caste system meant that the common people lived in severe subordination to the elite, despite the city's wealth. Most importantly, diseases plagued the city constantly. Cholera, malaria, tropical diseases spread by mosquitoes breeding in stagnant water. The enormous water infrastructure that kept the city alive, the tanks, the reservoirs, the channels, also created breeding grounds for mosquitoes. In the rainy season, disease would sweep through the crowded neighborhoods, killing thousands. So the opulent court of Krishnadevaraya, with its diamonds and jewels and temples, existed alongside disease, slavery, and rigid hierarchy. The wealth was real, the power was real, but the suffering was equally real. Krishnadevaraya died in 1529. The empire did not collapse immediately, but the death of a great ruler creates a power vacuum. And in Vijayanagara, this vacuum would be filled by the most cunning and ruthless man in the empire's history, Aliya Rama Raya. After Krishnadevaraya's death, power passed to Rama Raya, a powerful minister. He took control. The legitimate heir, Sadashiva Raya, was kept under house arrest, a prisoner in his palace. Real power belonged to Rama Raya. For 20 years, from 1542 to 1565, Rama Raya ruled. He played the sultanates against each other. He took territory. He humiliated them. He was confident, perhaps arrogant. The sultanates grew tired. They began to coordinate, to unite, to set aside differences. They realized together they could challenge Vijayanagara. The sultanates formed an alliance. Bijapur, Golconda, Ahmadnagar. This was unprecedented, and it would lead to the greatest battle of the age. During Rama Raya's rule, the empire was not unified. It was fractured. Behind the scenes, there were conspiracies. There were people plotting against Rama Raya. There were people loyal to the imprisoned king, Sadashiva Raya. There were factions within the royal family competing for power.
The Sangama dynasty that founded the empire had been replaced by the Saluva dynasty. The Saluva dynasty was then replaced by the Tuluva dynasty. Each transition involved intrigue, assassination, and betrayal.
There were poisonings. Kings were murdered by their own guards. Ministers were assassinated. Families that had ruled for generations were suddenly deposed. The palace of Vijayanagara was as dangerous as any medieval court in Europe. Perhaps more so. The armies themselves were filled with internal divisions. There were soldiers loyal to Rama Raya. There were soldiers loyal to the imprisoned king. There were mercenary generals who had no loyalty to anyone except whoever paid them. Among these generals were men of Muslim faith who fought for the Hindu Empire. They were skilled commanders, trusted with significant responsibility. But trust is fragile. It can be broken in a moment. As the sultanates united against Vijayanagara, the empire was already weakened by internal division. The king was a prisoner. The real ruler was an old man of 80, confident in his superiority, surrounded by generals whose loyalty was uncertain. The stage was set for catastrophe. January 23, 1565. The armies met at Talikota. Say it, Talikota. Also known as Rakshasa Tangadi. This would become one of the most decisive battles in Indian history. But very few people know about it. Rama Raya rode to battle on an elephant. An 80-year-old man leading an army. Around him rode 100,000 soldiers. Well-trained, well-equipped. The best army the empire could field. They expected to win. They had always won before. They had the numbers. They had the experience. They had supreme confidence. The allied sultanate forces numbered approximately 200,000. Bijapur, Golconda, Ahmadnagar, Berar, 5 sultanates united in a single cause. The destruction of Vijayanagara. This was unprecedented. The sultanates had never united before, but they had set aside their rivalries for this moment. The battle began. The two armies clashed. The scale was massive. Cavalry charges, infantry formations, tens of thousands of soldiers fighting, dying, screaming. The fighting lasted for hours, then for days, and in the early stages of the battle, Vijayanagara was winning. The army of Rama Raya was beating back the sultanate forces. The numerical advantage wasn't working in the sultanate's favor. Vijayanagara's soldiers were fighting with skill and discipline, and then it happened. In the middle of the battle, in the middle of combat, two generals, two important generals in Rama Raya's own army, two Muslim commanders who had served with honor and distinction, they turned, they switched sides, they took their troops, they joined the enemy forces. It was the perfect moment for betrayal. The moment when the outcome was uncertain. The moment when success was possible but not assured. And two men changed the course of history. The betrayal shattered Vijayanagara's army. The soldiers saw their own generals fighting against them. The shock was total. The demoralizer was complete. If your own leaders betray you, what hope is there? Rama Raya fought. The 80-year-old man fought to the end, but there was no end possible. The enemy surrounded him. They captured him. The Sultan of Ahmadnagar, Hussein Nizam Shah, ordered his decapitation. Rama Raya was beheaded. His head was displayed to the army. The effect was catastrophic. Complete panic. The army that had been organized became a fleeing mob. Soldiers ran. Officers abandoned their posts. The army dissolved. The battle was over. The empire had lost. 100,000 soldiers had been routed by 200,000. But more than that, the betrayal had destroyed something deeper. It destroyed the cohesion of the empire. It destroyed the unity of the army. It destroyed the belief that Vijayanagara was invincible. The real catastrophe was just beginning. After the battle, there was no organized army between the sultanate forces and the capital city. Hampi was vulnerable, exposed. The victorious armies marched toward it. The city had time to prepare, but what was there to prepare? The army was destroyed. The commander was dead. The legitimate king was a prisoner in the palace. Rama Raya's brother, Tirumala, made a decision. He gathered the royal treasure. He gathered the imprisoned king, Sadashiva Raya, and he fled. He left the city. He abandoned the population to their fate. What followed was one of the most destructive sieges and sackings in the history of the world. The Sultanate armies entered Hampi, and they did not come to negotiate. They came to destroy for 6 months. Not 3 days, not a week, but 6 months. For 6 months, the armies systematically destroyed the city. They killed, they burned, they demolished, they erased. The temples were the first targets. These were the symbols of Hindu power, the religious centers. They were set on fire. The intricate carvings were smashed. The sculptures were destroyed. Some were taken as trophies. Others were simply demolished out of rage. The palaces were looted and burned. The royal structures that took generations to build were reduced to ashes in days. The precious artwork was destroyed. The libraries were
burned. Manuscripts, handwritten texts, created by monks and scholars over decades, all burned, lost, gone.
The markets were plundered. The merchants' goods were stolen. The warehouses containing diamonds, spices, textiles, all the accumulated wealth of the empire was seized. The wealth that took years to accumulate was stripped in weeks. People died. Soldiers who remained were executed. Nobles were hunted and killed. Civilians were massacred. The population tried to flee. Some went south, some went east. The city that had 500,000 people became empty, and as the armies destroyed the city, something more sinister happened. The physical destruction was accompanied by historical destruction. The victorious sultanates began to rewrite the narrative. They claimed that Vijayanagara was never really that powerful, that it was less civilized than their sultanates, that the conquest proved the superiority of Islam over Hinduism, that Vijayanagara was a minor power, not a great empire. After 6 months, the armies left. The city was in ruins. The population was gone. The temples were destroyed. The palaces were ashes. The wealth was scattered. Vijayanagara was finished. But the narrative erasure lasted longer than the physical destruction. For 400 years, the world didn't know what had happened. European historians ignored Vijayanagara. They focused on the Mughal Empire that followed. They accepted the narrative that said Vijayanagara was peripheral, minor, unimportant. The ruins were reclaimed by the jungle. The civilization disappeared from history, and it remained disappeared until archaeologists in the 1800s and 1900s began to excavate and study the site. In 1986, the ruins were designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The world finally recognized Vijayanagara had been important. It had been great. It had been one of the great civilizations of the world. The story of Vijayanagara teaches us something crucial. It teaches us that civilizations are fragile, that power can be lost in a moment, that betrayal from within is more dangerous than any external threat, that arrogance precedes destruction. It teaches us that narrative matters. The victors got to tell the story. They got to decide what was important. They got to decide that Vijayanagara was minor, and the world believed them. But the ruins testified to a different truth. The temples, the architecture, the evidence of sophistication and artistry, the physical remains prove that Vijayanagara was great, and it teaches us that recovery is possible. For 400 years, the world forgot. But archaeology recovered the truth. And now we know the greatest empire in Southern Asia existed. It was powerful, it was wealthy, it was artistic, and it was destroyed by betrayal and arrogance. We should remember this, and if you're beginning to see that history is not what you were taught, if you're realizing that great civilizations were forgotten, if you want to understand the world the way it actually was, I'd love for you to watch the second video I made. It's about Cahokia, a city in America built by Native Americans. A city destroyed not by betrayal, but by climate and by the choices of people trying to survive. Like Vijayanagara, Cahokia was forgotten. Like Vijayanagara, it was great. Thank you for watching. I hope you'll stay with me.